Well, if you've been watching the news this week, you know we've been through a very busy cycle of news coming out of the Middle East. Going from an embassy attack to killing of a very powerful terrorist general coming out of Iran, to a tense moment in which the Iranians threatened to blow up some of our bases, but ended up lobbing a couple of missiles into some open fields where no one was hurt. I think they've come to the point where they actually believe that President Trump does mean business, and if they, in fact, they would have retaliated and American lives would have been lost, there would have been a very different outcome. And their reaction and response to the killing of their general, I think, pretty well demonstrates that. But I think there's also a possibility that something else could be setting the stage as well. Just as I believe that behind the scenes, I believe the Palestinians want to get back to a relationship with the United States and want to get back on the gravy train where they are being supported by the United States and also the European Union. Right now, they are in limbo, wondering where this is all going to lead. And at the same time, the Trump administration, although behind the scenes things are happening, you don't hear much about what is going on in the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I do know one thing is for sure, that the modern Arab world is fairly fed up, and I've read this multiple times in Stratford articles, but they're quite fed up with the Palestinians and the direction that they continue to walk down, at least out loud. Now, I stated in my last video that I believe that it's possible that there could be an Iranian deal with the United States before the election. Now, I got that from a commentator who indicated that there are talks going on behind the scenes. And due to the reaction of the Iranians, like I said, once their general had been killed, it's being reported that they're continuing and want to have still a backdoor with the United States. So that is where we are right now going into 2020, some 12 days in. Oh, and one more thing. When the Iranians shot down the Ukrainian jet, they first came out and said and denied that they had anything to do with it. But through international pressure, they finally came out and admitted that they shot down the Ukrainian jet and have now taken full responsibility for it. Now, whether or not that will actually bring about any convictions or a monetary type of settlement with Ukraine, that's unknown. But if that is in case what does take place, that would be a rather large step forward for Iran. And that would tell me that what this commentator has said, that it's very possible that there may be an Iranian-U.S. agreement before the election, could very well be true. So this is something that you need to be looking out for in the coming weeks and months, if in fact there is some type of compensation or trial or even a public apology to the Ukrainian people. But all these would be signs that Iran is changing its ways and is seeking some way back to some type of negotiation with the United States. Now, of course, on top of that, President Trump has also placed more sanctions on Iran. Now, he's also placing pressure on other countries, such as China and France and a few others that are still basically supporting Iran in their oil sector. But let's see exactly what happens with that. That would be another sign that the world is coming together and maybe clamping down on Iran to finally get them to do what they're supposed to do. Now, the European Union has already stated that they may be kicking in snapback sanctions on Iran if, in fact, they do not come back in line with the Iran agreement. Right now, they are heading outside the parameters that the agreement states, and they've indicated that you could see snapback sanctions on Iran as early as this week or next week. Now, of course, there are some countries in the European Union that depend upon the oil that Iran brings them. Some type of arrangement would have to be made for that to be replaced if, in fact, they were to cut off Iran. I don't think China is going to cooperate, but we'll see how that works. This may very well be how Russia comes into play. And, I've always said that once this agreement does take place, somebody is going to have to control Iran in Syria. I don't believe that they're leaving. In fact, Scripture indicates that they're going to be there once this attack takes place. But it will be a shock to the world and also to Israel when these nations gather up on Israel's northern border to come down and invade Israel. Now, of course, if you look at Ezekiel 38, you'll find out that there's actually no invasion that takes place, but it's more of a sequence of events that the Lord unleashes upon these countries that eventually kills 5/6 of the invading army that is gathered up. So if you look back on all wars that Israel has faced in which God goes before them, he always unleashes his wrath upon these countries, and they eventually begin to fight each other. And all Israel has to do is run into the invading camps and pick up the plunder and kill anybody that may very well be left behind. So if this is a war like many of the wars that Israel fought back in the days of the godly kings, that's exactly what I expect to take place. But as I stated in my last video, there has to be a day in which Israel is living safely within their own country and is in a time of peace. So frankly, what I see for coming up in this year is I see the dominoes beginning to fall. Now, I don't know who's going to fall first, whether it be Iran or the Palestinians, but at some point in time, these two entities are going to have to come to terms and are going to have to come to some type of agreement with the peace with many, in which Israel is in an environment of peace and safety. And I believe that's what this coming peace with many will actually bring. Now you might say, well, is Iran going to continue to reside in Syria along with Turkey and Russia? Well, in some capacity, I believe that they will. In fact, one person asked me a question as to whether I believed these three nations would be allowed to live in these areas once the agreement does take place. I think in a part of the peace agreement, they very well may be asked to fill the void of that country so that no terrorist state such as ISIS is able to spring up. So I think under President Trump's desire to get out of the Middle East, he may very well turn Syria over to Russia. And as part of this peace with many, Mr. Putin and possibly President Erdogan of Turkey will be given a proportionate type of responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen, where there's no terrorist void that does come up in which an organization such as ISIS is able to spring forth. And I think probably Russia will be in charge of making sure that Iran does not come in and stir things up against Israel. But I think one of the main things that you're going to see either in this year or the year following, and frankly, as I've said, I believe it's probably going to be before the election, Iran is going to want to go get some type of sanction relief. And it'd be nice if it was full sanctions relief in exchange for a full reversal on their nuclear policy and also a full reversal on their support for their terrorist proxies in Syria and also in Yemen. But I believe that's what it's going to take in order for them to achieve sanctions relief, is that they have to walk away or back off from supporting these terrorist units, both in Syria and also in Yemen. That would pretty much solve the problem that Saudi Arabia has, and would also give rise to an overall more peaceful environment in the Middle East as a whole. Now that would be solving the Iranian side, if in fact that does take place. We'll see. Also many have said that the Iranians are not done yet, that they're just on pause right now, and that they will continue to strike at the various countries in the Middle East, including the United States, through their proxies. That's something you need to keep an eye on and see if that's actually going to take place. If that continues to take place, then you know that sanctions relief and peace is probably further away and could be on the other side of the election. But we'll keep an eye on how they react. Now getting to the Palestinians. Not only are they having a very tough time financially, but they're quickly losing the support of the modern Arab world, and it's getting to the point to where if there is a peace with many, it may not even include whether or not Palestine has a state or whether the economic side of the agreement is enacted. It very well may be getting to the point to where the modern Arab world is ready to move on from this particular cause and move forward with some type of normalization with Israel, like many have been talking about, where they would have a military agreement where they would not attack Israel. Some type of non-aggression pact that would eventually move toward a full-blown peace proposal. And lastly, there's one more thing that's kind of flying under the radars and getting a lot of news, and that is the Israeli elections. They will be going to the polls for the third time within a year, and it's anybody's guess who will win this. But that will also determine the direction that the United States, Israel, and others will go. But to sum this all up, I really and truly believe that we are looking and moving toward some type of an agreement in which some will have to go in kicking and screaming, such as the Palestinians and also the Iranians, in order for this to become an environment that I believe will set the stage for the prophesied Gog and Magog war. And there's one thing about this war that you don't want to overlook. In verse 23 of Ezekiel 38, it says, "Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord." You know, according to that description, I would have to say that that's almost something that I would believe is going to take place before the rapture of the church, because we know that once the rapture of the church takes place, it is stated in multiple occasions that as the plagues and the books are and the seals are broken, that after a certain plague is placed upon the earth, that even though they knew who brought the plagues, they were not interested in magnifying the Lord, nor did they have any desire to know the Lord. In fact, the Bible says that they did not want to know the Lord, and they cursed the very name of God. And at the very end, it states that when they saw the Lord coming in the sky, the nations mourned. So it's something else that you need to look at when you try to place this event in the coming days of these last times. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you don't know the Lord, you know today is the day that you do need to know Him. You know, there'll be 150,000 people who will die before this day is up. The Bible says that the vast majority will end up in a burning hell. Don't let that happen to you. Come to the Lord, allow Him to save you, and from this day forward, live for Him. And you Christians, you need to get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. You need to get it in the hands of every lost friend and loved one that you know. You don't want to rely upon them to stumble upon this book as they look for information on the internet. Although I do have a tremendous amount of information, and there's a very good chance if they look for it, they'll find it. You want them to have this in their hand once the rapture takes place. So I would recommend that you go down to my description section of this video, click on the link, and go and get your paperback version. Well, certainly you can also get the free version. It's the same book. It's written in 9 different languages, and you can in some way try to get it on their device, or at least allow them to know that this book is out there and available. Well, I hope you'll do that, and I hope you'll subscribe. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.